What's up, everyone? Welcome back to school. But don't worry, everything is cool. I'm your host, Jalissa, and of course, we have a special guest today. We got Ricky Mack. Say hi.
Hello.
And of course, we have the boys, Steve and Brandon. Say what's up, you guys.
What's up? And then,
So, how y'all doing today?
We're doing pretty good, but we have a special announcement. We got our first patron.
Hey.
yeah, nice.
And this person, they subscribe to the highest tier, which means not only do they get a shout out, not only do they get exclusive content, but they get a hand on the wall.
Hey.
I don't really know the proper way to pronounce your name. I'm gonna say Yol. You can comment, go off in the comments and
Yeah.
say.
I'm gonna say Yoel. Just like slip that in there.
Have
Just
both.
slip that in there.
But here's your hand. It's gonna go right on the wall right now.
Like you know when a kid draws a really good drawing, it's like it's gonna go right here,
Right
like
on the
right on the
fridge.
fridge. It's gonna
So,
go like that.
Thank you for subscribing to our Patreon. And if anybody else wants a hand on the wall, you know what you got to do. But
Links in our bio. Links in the description too.
Yeah.
But anyways, we're here joined again by Ricky Mack. Thanks for joining us, Ricky.
Thank you guys for having us.
Yeah,
Really
of
excited.
course.
Ricky of the Un Poquito podcast, by the way, which is an amazing podcast. I think you guys should check it out because I think if you like our podcast, you're really going to love their podcast.
Yeah, it's super funny.
Thank you.
Ricky, I know you do comedy, so I wanted to ask you, like, so how did you get into the comedy scene? Like, when was the point where you felt like this is something I want to do with my career?
Oh yeah, saying career for me, that's a big deal. I was, I'll build some context.
Yeah, of course.
Like, you know how like in high school when everybody's into like music and whatever else they're into?
Yeah.
I only kind of cared about like video games and comedy.
Oh, wow.
And then so people would ask me about music, and I listened to music. I like music, but I was like, but also comedy. Like, but no one really cared. And like I would watch all of it, good and bad, like on Comedy Central. I remember people's jokes from like 20 years ago, like comedians' jokes. And eventually I had a girlfriend after high school. She's like no fear, like what would you want to do? And I was like, oh, I think like eventually maybe comedy. And she didn't make fun of me. No, I think people could use that. And I was like really scared. Like it felt like I was like admitting a big secret. And like at 24, I think is when I started going to open mics.
Okay.
I had to go to therapy first to admit it. And then I cried a little bit. And then I was like, I'll go do comedy now.
Wait, really? That's
Yeah.
a real story?
Yeah.
Well,
That's real.
why did it bring that much strife between you? Like inside of you?
Well, I think it's just like immigrant parent stuff. Like,
Okay.
I don't think they, like, my family ever told me I can't do these things, but like to believe you get to choose to choose like a thing that just seems really selfish when like there's expectations for you to help your family is like, you kind of got to go to therapy at that age, at least back then. Cause I'm 34 right now. Like 10 years ago, no one was going to therapy. Like not no one, but like I was the first one in my family to go to therapy and make it cool, you know?
So how was that initial phase? Like, did your parents like? Because I know a lot of people, at least online, are like, "Oh, when I first went to therapy, my immigrant parents kind of were like, oh, like they thought there was something wrong with me, and I had to explain to them that no, like if anything, going to therapy is something everybody should do." How was that conversation with your parents?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't really a conversation for a while. It was just something I was doing. Like I'd go to work. That job I mentioned that I stayed at for like 13 years, way too long. And like I would go to work, then go to therapy on Wednesdays and come home with like red eyes and really tired. And I would pass out like it just looked like I was on drugs. Like I just have red eyes and I would just sleep because I was like crying too much. Yeah. And like, so at first it was kind of like hushed tones, like, oh, did you hear like Ricky's talking about his feelings out loud, you know, like, so yeah. So I think I rationally now processing a lot of that stuff. I think I learned from my family because they were illegal is that to draw any attention to yourself was a bad thing. And then to go choose something where you draw the most attention to yourself is inherently scary and dangerous.
So would you say comedy now, when you do stand up, it's like therapeutic in a way itself, because you're in a way like fighting that mentality?
Yeah, there's still part of me that's feeling something right now. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I don't consciously think about it now because I've been doing it for so long. Mm-hmm. But I eventually realized like, oh, this is something this is a personal fight. To get better, I have to be vulnerable, like at anything, like because I had to, I just had to hide everything. Like, don't tell anyone anything. Even though, like, after a while, my mom got like Reagan amnesty, and like that fear is still like everything can be taken away, right? So it's like, as a kid I didn't know, but as you get older, you're like, I understand all their reasoning now.
Oh,
yeah.
Wow. When you were younger, though, did you have some sort of like, I guess resentment's a little too strong of a word, but did you have some push and pull with them? Like, did you not understand fully like why they were kind of maybe being a little closed-minded when it came to certain topics like that? Or were you always kind of very understanding that I know my parents are probably thinking a certain way because of circumstance of what they've seen? Like you said, they were illegal immigrants, right?
Yeah.
So obviously, like, did you always understand that, or was that something new that you learned when you got older?
That's something the context grew as I got older. Because like the problem with like my family story is like, yeah, my parents were illegal. My dad passed away when we were really young, and then we were left with my mom. And then we have like a whole sordid, I'm okay, we're talking about it, but like a whole sordid history of like my mom was taking care of us and there's 10 of us.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And it's like, I guess eventually I just keep talking about this openly, but there's 10 of us. I'm number 8. I joke about it. And then she lost custody of us. Family friends took us in. My uncle took us in. And eventually like that story leads to my mom gaining custody of us back as we get older. So it's like all that illegal immigration shit. Sorry if I'm cussing.
No, it's you're completely fine. Yeah, you
all
can
that illegal
cuss,
immigration shit is like, there's so many layers to go through before you're like, oh yeah, they were afraid of losing everything, but you still got to deal with like losing parents, like social services, and like the school system and things like that. And you're like, oh, eventually you're like, you get to the answers of like, oh, this was because of this was because of that. And that's why you don't answer the door when the census comes.
Oh, wow.
That's crazy. It kind of reminds me of, I don't know if you've heard this. They say that a lot of people who get into the comedy scene, who become comics, a lot of them have kind of like suffered through some sort of thing in their past. And I wonder, as you, somebody who I'm sure you've been around a lot of other comics, because you don't have to speak for yourself, obviously.
Yeah.
But would you say that's something that's true when you go into the scene?
I think that's not true. I think there's some normal, healthy people. Like there's some people that don't have like huge traumas.
Yeah.
But I think it drives someone to develop a defense mechanism to just try to be funny about everything and like make it light. Like if you just deal with heavy stuff, some people make light of it, and it kind of pushes you into that realm, you know?
Yeah, I totally get that. One of the questions I also wanted to ask you, because it kind of goes in line with this idea of like older versus younger generation. So you said you're 34, right?
Yeah, I'm 34.
Not to like expose you or anything.
No worries.
I mean, I think 30 is pretty young. I think even 60 is young. Yeah.
I feel like you're
I'm making it worse.
backpedaling right now.
My bad. But I wanted to ask you because, like, I remember me and my sister were watching Full House, funny enough. And Danny Tanner, I think in the show, he's like in his 30s. And he's talking about when he was a young teenager, all the older generation would like bag on us young kids. And he's like, I never want to get old and be like that. And I'm like, that's mind blowing to me because at the time that show's being filmed like in the 90s and now it's 2023. And like, I feel like that's something that still goes on. And I wanted to ask you, like, how does it feel going from being the younger generation where like you're pushing for new ideas in the Latino community of like therapy and talking about your feelings, to now being part of the older generation where like us, we it's not like that we see you guys as bad guys or anything, but it's obviously like the old generation is always the one that is telling us like, oh, you guys shouldn't be talking about these ideas, like, or some of these concepts don't exist, like it's kind of bad. How does it feel to kind of like balance that with like what you personally believe?
Yeah, partly because it can clash with doing comedy, depending on how you do it. I am like worried I could become that older person that's just like, get over it, suck it up. You guys have it easy, you know? But it's also like, I've been there, like you said, like just going to therapy was a huge deal 10 years ago to me. Now who hasn't tried it, you know?
Wow.
It's like weed.
Yeah, it's like weed. All right, it's legal now. It's not cool. You know, it's not scary. Well, it's scary,
Everyone
whatever.
has a therapist now.
Yeah.
Everyone has a dealer now.
Sometimes they're both.
Exactly.
But I do worry about that. I also don't want to lie and pretend I get everything. But I also am like, make an effort to learn where people, I think that's a good thing about me. And for my comedy is like, I still want to know why people believe what they believe, what their motivations are, and why they're fighting for what they're fighting for. Clearly it comes from something. Some of these older people, like say in our community, will be like, this didn't exist before. You're just making stuff up. You're just trying to be a victim. And it's like, yeah, but I hear the victim inside of you. Like, I think you're really sensitive because you can't let people have things that you didn't have. And like, they're like, I got spanked and I turned out fine. I was like, yeah, but you're angry all over the internet. Like, clearly that made you angry. And it's like, yeah, maybe it wasn't the worst thing, but like there's studies that show that like you get hit at all as a kid by the person that's supposed to protect you, it kind of dysregulates your feelings and your ability to control your anger as you get older.
Yeah.
Totally.
So I derailed a little bit, but I think that ties back to like, you want to invalidate these younger people's beliefs and truths because your truth is painful, even if you don't want to admit it.
Yeah, I've heard that because it's kind of like that idea of, I went through a bad time, so I feel like the next people should also go through that bad time, right? It's weird because you kind of see it in all aspects, even like economically. You see a lot of people being like, well, I mean, like I didn't have free healthcare, so why should the next generation have free
totally.
healthcare?
With I saw that especially with when they forgave some student loans. We're like, oh, I mean, I took out, I mean, I'm still paying off my debt.
Yeah.
Why shouldn't everybody else? You know what I mean? Stuff like that. So I totally get that. I think that's a great point you made. But yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of like the older generation being a little resentful of like how kind of we have it in a way. But I think it's interesting how you talk about it, because I'm kind of like, I feel like I sort of saw that with like I guess older like people and all that stuff, and like how you talked about that like the way people also perceive you, right? Like your parents being like, you shouldn't put yourself in a place where people can kind of like judge you, right? Because I remember hearing that a lot from my mom, and like she's like, oh, what's ¿qué va a decir la gente? Like, what are people gonna say about you if you're doing all this and this? But you can see now that like the older we got, the more she kind of like, in an interesting way, she kind of like started being a lot more like chill about everything. Because I think when we were younger, she was for sure like that. At least with me, I remember she would always like tell me like, oh, what are people gonna say about you if like you do this and blah blah, or like all that stuff. But I think the older we got, now she's kind of like, you know, they're adults now. They can kind of think for their own kind of thing.
I think it's definitely like an effort of kind of protection. I think she probably thinks that way because it's like, obviously we're her little baby birds, and it's like, you know, when I me and Brandon talk about all the time, and we kind of, I don't know if we've mentioned this on the show before, but I think it's definitely braver to be vulnerable than to kind of close off, especially on the internet. I think it's a lot braver to be that guy, to be like, this is how I feel, rather than be somebody who's like, oh, nothing bothers me. Like, people can joke about anything and like people shouldn't be upset. I think it's easier to do that, and it's a lot harder to actually say authentically how you feel, because when you're vulnerable, you know, your shield is down. And so let's say you talk about something like, oh, when I grew up, like I always had problems, like, you know, just dealing with my self-esteem. People will look at that and be like, haha, like that's on you. Like they'll laugh at you and they'll point you out. And that's so difficult, you know, but then, you know, you turn that around. And if you were just like, oh yeah, I've always been confident, I've always loved who I was, you know, that's obviously something that people aren't going to really like then comment on, and when their comments aren't gonna hurt you because it's not the same type of like connection, you know, it's not genuinely somebody who you are. And I think our mom probably like growing up saw that and was like, you know, like the best way to kind of shield yourself and help yourself out is to never really let people know how you actually feel, you know. But moving on a little bit, moving on to a different kind of topic, I wanted to talk about you with this idea of like identity. Because I think it's really interesting with you, because I talked about in the previous podcast about how like just colorism like in like our culture. And for you, I think it's really interesting because you mentioned you have illegal immigrant parents. Yeah. And I think, would you consider yourself a white passing Mexican?
Yeah. This is also something that like I had to like wrap my head around as I got older. Because my family didn't talk about color. Like we're just more güero. We're from Guadalajara, outside of Guadalajara. And it's like a lot of güeros live over there, like güero Latinos, Mexicans. Yeah. And it's like, am I white passing? Definitely. But also people say like, it's also like heavily contextual at times. Like I remember I had this old coworker who was German, and I was like, I tried to like come out to him like, I think I'm just kind of like a white guy. And he's like, no, you're not. Like, to me, you're just like he kind of said it jokingly, but he's like, you're Mexican. Like to him, where they invented racism, and like where he's not really German, but his ancestry is German. He's like, you're Mexican, and I'm like in a way, like thank you, but also like in a way, like this is interesting. Yeah, because yes, I'm pretty white passing. Some people just think I'm Middle Eastern, which is a debate there about like, are you brown in the Middle East? It depends, right?
Yeah, of course.
So yeah, I will say yeah. And it's something I had to like wrap my head around, because when I was growing up, like I didn't not see color, but we didn't really talk about it like that. And like all my friends were Mexican, and I tried to be cholo and to fit in and everything like that. I was like a little Miklo, you know? We just did like a blood in, blood out episode, like until middle school. I didn't keep it.
Okay.
I tried to wear the flannel, you know?
Yeah, the shaved head and everything.
Yeah, for sure, like the fade. So yeah, I'm white passing, and it's something I had to like wrap my head around, because I grew up in Monrovia, which had Latinos, which had black people, but it was very much a white city. Yeah. It's Monrovia, like Monroe, like the president. And all the teachers, most of the administrators, most of the authorities in the city is just white people. And then I would like interact with their kids, and some of them would be my friends, and some of them are still my friends to this day, but then they would tell me what their parents would say about like Mexicans and illegals and stuff. And it's like, oh, like, but your dad hates my family. It's like, maybe they hate us less because we're not as brown, but everything you just told me, I was just trying to play a video game with you. Like, your dad hates me or my family. And it's like always stayed with me. Yeah. Like, and it's like affected some friendships that I've had. Like, I haven't told them. I haven't told them, but it's like, I think because I'm white passing, that knowledge is very easily passed to me, and they're like, I don't know, deal with it. Because they probably wouldn't say it to you, right? Yeah. And it's like, so in some ways I got like dirty knowledge because of it, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, but it's affected me.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'm white passing.
Yeah, because I brought it up because when I talked about colorism, I was reading like a lot of the comments, and one thing that I found extremely interesting and I thought needed like a spotlight is that there is another side to the story of that there's a lot of white passing like Mexicans who I was reading their stories and they felt like they didn't fully feel like they could identify as like a Mexican and could like feel they ever felt like they were accepted in the Latino community because they weren't brown enough. And I was wondering like if you've ever felt that sort of way too.
Yeah, I still kind of feel that way.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot easier to like own that and like talk to you guys about that because like just hearing conversations that you guys have had of like, even though you have more indigenous features, you're always still fighting that battle of like, am I enough?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, yeah, I'm more güero. I need to own it and not be delusional about it and not disregard my privileges. But it's also like, oh, but I'm still kind of fighting a battle that you're fighting. It's different, but that feeling of like still being shoved out is the same. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally. I think it's because a lot of like Mexican Americans and a lot of people in the culture the whole culture is basically based on like mestizo, like mixed. Like what everybody who's really from like Mexican American culture is like a mixed baby, and obviously some of us, like me and my sister, have more indigenous features than others. Like all the way to the spectrum of like Brandon, who's like a mixed baby, you know. And I think it continues to push this kind of like identity crisis, which is so weird because I never really realized a lot of people kind of live in the denial of it. They kind of are like, oh no, all Mexicans, we're all the same. We all suffer the same strifes and do it. And I agree, we do suffer. We share a lot of strifes, but I think we all are fighting like individual battles, which weirdly enough sometimes kind of pits each other against each other. You know, that's why we trip each other up because, you know, like I'm thinking of, do you know who Peso Pluma is?
I've become aware of Peso.
Yeah, right. Some people were bringing up about how he's a very white passing Mexican because he's obviously like he looks very like if you changed his clothes they put him like in a suit I guess and got rid of the mullet and he looked like a white guy, right? And people are talking about how like it's sad that you don't see somebody who's like darker skin and indigenous features in the same realm like blowing up like that. And it kind of shows you that like it's cool because he's making a lot of progress for Mexicans in this like mainstream world of music. And then on the other side of it is that it's just sad that it's still like a colorist issue of like he's a very light-skinned like non-indigenous looking man, you know, and some people are like, no, but it's still like it's good for us, you know, we're really like representing, but at the same time it's like I don't know, it's like a lot of steps forward but still not like it's still like at least one step back for me. But I guess that's my side of things, you know. I do think that it's important to highlight like because when I was reading the comments, right, I thought it was really important to kind of see that perspective of like I can imagine, I guess being born and you identify a lot with your Mexican community, you're not accepted. You know, that's the whole term Chicano comes from, right? Yeah. About being like coming to the States and feeling like you don't belong here. But then in Mexico, you know, you're not a real Mexican either.
Yeah, for sure.
And so I think we share that kind of like internalized like strife, which made me want to like ask you because I'm like I think I'm excited that we're both from like I have immigrant parents too. And like I'm excited that we kind of share that strife, and I think it's important that we also are always like aware of like where we kind of stand in terms of colorist like issues.
Yeah.
You get what I mean?
Yeah. Well, because I feel like I remember one of my friends, and she always heard about it, and she would talk to me about it because she's also very white passing, and she would tell me like a lot of people would just tell me that like. I understand that I have a lot of privilege because I am white passing, but it's like, but then they try to tell me that like I'm also not like Mexican enough, right? And I feel like we equally both have that as like an indigenous looking person and as her as a white passing Mexican, right? and again, like how he said, I think it's just like it causes us a lot more tension to kind of fight. And there is a lot of that going on, right? Of like, oh, you're white passing, you have better privilege, and like it's all being talked about nowadays, where it's like you would see in novellas and like how it's always light skinned, and like sometimes they're also European and like all that stuff, and like you hear about it.
Yeah, some of them are from France, which is crazy.
And like I feel like hearing, I guess, everyone's side, I always try to be open-minded about what they think about. And I guess it goes back to like we're each just fighting our own battles, right? And it does suck sometimes when we can't like collectively come together and like kind of the same thing with like Peso Puma, right? Like he's making the Mexican music like a lot more aware, right? And all that stuff. But it's like then there's the downside of him like being white passing, and like should we be celebrating that? Should we not be celebrating it? And it's kind of like it's in such a conflict, because I remember it was the same thing with like when Bad Bunny, and I remember a lot of people were like, oh, like he's very white passing, and like compared to other reggaeton artists, like they're not getting like their recognition as much as like he is, and blah blah blah. So it's kind of like I feel like there's always just that thing of like you can't satisfy everyone, right? Or like in a way, right? But I think at the same time, it's like, I guess for those, they should be at least helping out other artists who aren't as like them. Or I don't know.
Well, I think it's a hard convo, because I think it's like, for me, it's more, I like talking about it because I think it's important that we should become aware, because at least younger me was more kind of angry about it, of like, man, like I hate that they share in the culture, and they like kind of want to like in a way like take all of our battles for us, but they don't even like they don't go through the same strifes that I do, because obviously like I can't change who I am. Because I remember the thing that would always get me is that sometimes I would wear certain things and people would be like, oh, you're trying to dress like a cholo, you're trying to dress very Chicano. And I would always think in my head, like, you wouldn't be saying that if I was a white passing Mexican. You would just think I'm just wearing a clothes. But because like of my face and my facial features, you think I look like a cholo because that's a stereotype. Yeah. And like that's the type of stuff that would always anger me. But it wasn't until recently that I was like, no, I think honestly, even for the white passing Mexicans, you guys will never fully be accepted by, like, I guess you could say, like, the white side of the world. I don't know what you could say.
Yeah, there's some that will. But there's definitely like, and I don't want to like over like sell the xenophobia effect, but that is real. And to them, that just, to some of them, it's just racism and xenophobia are the same thing for them, and they still want to shove you out. And it's interesting because like I've experienced it a few times, but you can see the privilege in my statement of like I've experienced it a few times, and it's like it's interesting because. It's interesting to see people that look like either of us still try to like side in with whiteness. Yeah. And like have been rejected by it and still kind of like, but maybe if I just like dip my toe in. Like
totally. Yeah. And there's totally like this idea of, and I think it goes for a lot of minority groups of like, if you can assimilate, right? There's still that idea of colonization in there. If you can assimilate with the white side of like America or the white side of the world, then you will maybe like some success or some prosperity will rub off on you. And then maybe in the future you'll be fully accepted, and all these like, all this generations of oppression will finally be a thing of the past, right? I think it's something that is more subconscious than conscious, though. I think most people don't really are consciously thinking that. Like, I don't think a lot of minorities wake up and are like, oh, I can't wait. I wonder how I can be white today. You know, I think it's very subconscious. You know, it's like because I know for me especially. I mean, I've talked about it with a lot of other Mexican American friends, and I know most people on the internet wouldn't admit this, but at least I feel like when you're younger, it's definitely more conscious, and it becomes subconscious when you get older. When you're younger, it's like, oh, you know, like because you get, at least I remember my sister talking about it, you get bagged on for listening to like Mexican music or Spanish music as like a little kid, because obviously all the little kids, you know, you don't know, you're ignorant, you're uneducated, you're like, when things are different, you bag on those kids. So obviously when you grow up, you're like, oh, I feel a little ashamed of like representing my heritage, so I want to put it away because I want to like, I don't want to appear more white, right? Yeah. And when you then grow up with that, it becomes more subconscious of like, no, like, you see, I'm not like these other Mexicans. Like, I love like Trump, you know, like, You get what I mean?
Yeah, but just kind of to echo Ricky's point, because I think it's an important aspect of this conversation, is when he talks about how, or when he said, you can't be delusional about it. You know what I mean? Like, maybe I'm not the best person to articulate this point. But,
just write it down and then I'll repeat.
But there's this TikTok that's been floating around that I thought was kind of interesting. And this I didn't save it. I don't really know the context. It's one of those street interviews, and there's this woman who looks just like a white woman, and she talks about how, like, oh, I'm Mexican, I've experienced gentrification, and then she goes on to say, like, oh, I moved to New York though. You know what I mean? Kind of missing the point that she's not only white passing,
I've seen it.
But she's also a gentrifier. And I've seen, and you know, I don't know the context to that TikTok. I mean, it could be like a setup. It could, you know what I mean? Because a lot of TikToks do that. But I'm just saying that to echo the point of, like, I think there are people who are white passing, and there are people who are just white. Yeah. You know what I mean? And I think maybe that's part of the awkwardness, is because I feel like with Mexicans, right? Or the state of Mexican and Mexico, that's a nationality, you know? Yeah. And there's Asian people who are Mexican. Yeah. There's black people who are Mexican. Yeah. You know what I mean? So I think when there's white people who are just white people, and they're like, oh, I'm Mexican, you know what I mean? It's kind of hard, because I feel like sometimes there's that attempt of trying to be like, I'm oppressed as well. Yeah. You know what I mean? And it's an important aspect of it, because I don't know. I think it detracts from people who like Ricky, right? His parents were undocumented, right? His mom lost custody of them. He's experienced real effects of his cultural background. You know what I mean? But then you get to people who don't live in Mexico, who've never been to Mexico, who have family who've been here for like 3 generations, and my great grandpa was Mexican. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? Like, so I think,
Well, it's because it's like two different sides, right? It's like you hear the side from like people who are directly from Mexico, and then people who are from here. And the people who are from here also sometimes have a stereotype of what a Mexican looks like.
Yeah,
right?
that's true. Yeah.
And like usually a Mexican is brown, right?
Yeah.
And so when someone who's white passing is like, oh, I'm Mexican, they're like, you're not Mexican, you don't look Mexican. And but it's kind of like, what does Mexican look like?
No, that's
right.
True,
but it's like
sure.
Mexico is very diverse, like, and I think that's what people don't understand. Like, I think people think that every Mexican is just brown, like, and that's just the standard. Like, they're just brown. But I think people don't understand that Mexico is also as diverse as the United States.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like how you said, there's a lot of Asian Mexicans. There's a lot of like Afro Latinos, right? Like there's a whole diversity there that people, I guess, are a little blinded by in a way, or like don't see it either. Because I remember hearing about that, and like people being like, if you go to New York, right, you see a lot of people who are from Puebla, and like for a good amount of them, like they are. Because Puebla is a very still like indigenous country or like city, so like you go there and you see a lot of people, right, that look like Mexicans would look, right. So it's kind of like I feel like people have an image of like what Mexicans look like. So when someone who's like bypassing and they're like, I'm Mexican, and you're like,
no, for sure.
I don't think so.
I guess my perspective of it is like, I think what Ricky said is important. You have to acknowledge the privileges you have, right? Like if you're white passing, or maybe you're just white, you know what I mean? You have to acknowledge that, like, there's a lot of it privileges, you know, like how Ricky said, like, even just hearing the casual racism that somebody wouldn't say to Steve, or stuff like that, you know what I mean? But I think there's probably that knee-jerk reaction of like, well, I face bad stuff too. Why isn't it? They probably feel like, oh, you're saying my experiences aren't as valid as yours, you know what I mean? But then also the other side, right, where I feel like variant Mexicans or Latinos, or you know, anyone who has who struggles and has very indigenous looking features, I can definitely see why they feel sometimes a little insulted. You know what I mean? Where it's like, bro, like you don't have no idea how good you have it. You know what I mean? Because my dad talks about this all the time, right? My dad will talk to me about like the privileges I have that he didn't have. My dad will tell me all the time. When he was young and he was working, he names all the times that he lost a job to the boss's son, and quite literally the boss's son, where he felt like he worked the hardest, he was the most qualified to the job, he did everything he did to deserve that job. But then they'd be like, hey, sorry, man, like, we gotta let you go because the boss's son wants it, and he's a white guy. Obviously, they wouldn't say like, oh, you know, he's a white guy, you know, but the context is implied. Yeah. I don't have that, you know what I mean? I'm not gonna ever experience that of like, hey man, take a hike, you know, this white guy wants the job, you know. So I definitely could see people who experience that, like people like you guys, who maybe the police harassed, maybe you missed out on opportunities, maybe, you know, a lot of stuff like that, where I could definitely see the knee-jerk reaction of that, of like, no, like, you guys just don't get it, you know what I mean? So I can kind of see both sides, but I think that just further solidifies the point is that it's heavily contextualized, and you need to, I guess you just need to understand the context to this kind of thing, because it is very sensitive, you know?
That's why it's important too, because I also don't want to deny like white passing Mexicans' identity, because also I remember I read, and this is cool. There's this TikToker. I think her name's Vanilla Salt. Shout out to her. I hope she's not problematic or anything. I'm not endorsing anybody like that's weird, but she tagged us in like a couple of videos that like were really like eye opening and very educational, just about like indigenous identity. And one of the things that she brought up was that like the thing that sucks is that there is indigenous Mexicans who, just because of like you know, just the way biology is, they came out lighter. Yeah, like they just came out lighter, but phenotype. And so they came out lighter. They still look the same, but they're just lighter. And obviously, like to be like, oh, you know, like you guys aren't gonna suffer the same way that I do, is kind of taken away from like the stripes that they feel, and it doesn't make them any less of an indigenous descent person, you know. And I mean, I've met people who live in LA who are like 4th, 5th, 6th generation Chicanos. And they talk about how like, I don't speak Spanish, but like I obviously love like my culture. And so I really much think it's also important to kind of highlight that side of like the story, because, you know, their identity as important as it is as my identity to my indigenous descent is, you know. And I think it's important that we're just all made aware, like you said, just be aware of like what we each kind of gain and lose from like this conversation of identity. But kind of moving it on before I pass the baton to you guys. My last question, well, not my last question, but my key highlight that I wanted to ask you before we move on is I wanted to talk to you because I know that you're not in a monogamous relationship, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. Is that okay?
I mean, I'm posting about it now. So okay.
I'm sorry. I don't know if I didn't like expose you or anything.
It's like you're not. It's just it's not new, but me posting about it is new. But I'm okay with talking about it.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Well, because I'm just really interested, because we've talked about monogamy in the past, and I wanted to ask, like, so have you always kind of like geared to educate me for a second. It's called polygamous?
Like I'll do like a quick overview.
Okay.
Polyamory is like you intend to have it varies. I'll just cut and dry it. Polyamory is like you intend to love the people that you are partnering or dating, right? And that could mean you don't end up dating them long term. Maybe you do, whatever you guys agree to. Non-monogamous is more of like, hey, I want to go date around. Maybe that means I don't get to fall in love with them. It gets like really in the weeds of like how you define everything. But non-monogamy is kind of like, oh, we get to date other people. However, we choose to like set boundaries is how we choose to set boundaries. But it's also, people do that in monogamy too. Like what degree of, it's interesting. Once you start like parsing through all this, like even in monogamy, like what degree of a friendship, say you're in a hetero relationship, what degree of a friendship are you allowed to have with the opposite sex? Because those answers vary from relationship to relationship, totally. Right? So it's like when I start to say all this stuff, it sounds like really like overcomplicated and nitpicky. But when you start to enter into that stuff, and I'm still like, I'm not going to be like, I'm a professional. I'm still learning, and we still talk about this stuff. But you start to realize like, oh, you're supposed to negotiate relationships with people and not assume everyone's on the same page to begin with, right? And it's like once you enter into anything alternative, this is like the most queer straight people can be, is like non-monogamy, because then you are forced to like rethink what you're supposed to be doing anymore. You have to like consciously say what you want and set boundaries and be vulnerable for real. So it's interesting. I don't know.
So there's monogamous, non-monogamous,
and polyamorous.
and polyamorous.
Yeah.
Right.
So I guess like there's all these other like details
Yeah,
you could
yeah.
dive
Okay.
into.
Yeah. When did you first like I guess make that? Were you monogamous before when you were younger? And then-
Absolutely.
yeah. When
Like-
did it you make that like change? Was that very recently?
Yeah, it's in this relationship that became a thing. I think like we could talk about it. It all ties into like why I thought I couldn't do this.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me.
He's choked
I
up.
thought, yeah, I totally thought you were about to like break down. I was like, oh, I'm sorry.
Love just makes me gassy. It like I think like figuring this stuff out. Like I think I kind of wanted this from since when I was younger, but it sounds crazy and delusional. I grew up really Catholic. I even went back to church at like 18. Crazy. Like I was trying to find structure, you know, and it's like, so I went back to church. There is one way to do things. I left the church. So there's still these like remnants of like, whatever I want is not valid. And it's hard to get to a point of like, even imagining people that you date would even be okay with that. So like, it took me until my 30s to even begin to really talk about that stuff. And I kind of have wanted this stuff. I was still very like romantic at times, and like my first serious relationship was monogamous and it was long distance. And I know people like make fun of long distance relationships, but it was very like vulnerable. We communicated about a lot of things. She taught me how to communicate. Women taking too much emotional labor. But at the very end of that relationship, she even offered like an open thing.
Oh, wow.
And I didn't take it. Because like back then, even though like I think I wanted that, there's still these rules I thought I had to follow. And like I realized like it took me a long time, but like this part of like therapy has led me to allow myself to ask for what I want and allow people to give me an exact answer, yes or no, or negotiate things. And it's like, I think how do I say this? I've gotten here because I've allowed people to hurt me or love me more than I ever used to. So it's like, there's deeper stuff to this. Sometimes you just want to have fun with people, right? Yeah. Like, I'm not going to like pretend this is all like romance, you know, but it's like, but it's also practicing vulnerability and learning to connect with people and like share your stories with people.
Yeah.
For a lot of people, I think they wouldn't be able to kind of do it because they feel like that part of like jealousy and like that part of like kind of, I guess some people feel like they have kind of a possession over like the romantic partner. How do you deal with that aspect of it?
I think part of that is in my earlier answer of like, allowing, it still feels like at least initially felt very dangerous. Like who knows what's going to happen, right? Like we could just ruin a good thing. We could ruin this. If we know we love each other, we might ruin this. And I was also like, trying not to be like, say I knew what I was doing. I was like, I'm owning this risk. And if I feel like an idiot, I'm going to tell people I'm an idiot. You know, like I made this mistake. But I think it's kind of like accepting that and feeling that out and then relinquishing some control. Because it's like you said, it's kind of people feel possessive and controlling of these things because sometimes it's not even because you love them. It's because you think there's no more love. You think there's no one else you can love again or no one else can love you like they're loving you. And you think whatever you think, it gets real personal, but it's like you might think you don't deserve another love and that maybe you thought you tricked this person or maybe you think you're not worth it. You're not worthy. So you kind of control and like hide them from other people. And it's like, yeah, you might love them, but you might not want what's best for them. And that's kind of starts pulling away from love, right? And it's like, I'm not saying it has to be non-monogamy, but if you really love someone, what if someone was better for them? Like, you know, so people do these things. And if you kind of deconstruct this stuff, it kind of forces you to look at yourself that jealousy isn't the worst thing. Keeping someone to yourself when you can't give them what they need is probably worse. And it's also like, yeah, there's been jealousy, but it's also like you start to realize like, oh, if you can get past that, the next day you might just be like, oh, but what's for lunch? Like some of it can be very normal. And then also you can realize like, oh, no one else is going to mess this up. I'm going to mess this up. If anyone's going to mess it up, it's going to be me. Like, like no one can get in the way unless you let them get in the way, right? If you really love somebody, you would work on yourself and you would see what you need to do and see if you guys are even compatible. So a stranger or another person you care about actually wouldn't mess that up unless, I mean, yeah, there's exceptions, but you have to allow it to get messed up. You have to stop being honest. You have to stop being vulnerable. You have to stop communicating. You have to be mean to them and push them away. It's the jealousy is like the smallest detail at a certain point.
Well, because it's also kind of that thing of like, if you do all those things too, and they still kind of like feel like they should be with someone else, then that just means you guys obviously, you know, it wasn't meant to be, and you'll find somebody who is like will like gel with you in all those aspects of like, you built yourself up to be a good person for them and they just weren't feeling it. You have to also kind of be aware of like, that's okay too. You know, sometimes you meet people that, you know, you guys just couldn't work it out, and then you'll work it out with whoever's next, you know, but I think there's that fear definitely of like, I won't find somebody else. Yeah. Absolutely. And the jealousy just kind of like, that fear just kind of really festers and like, it makes people become kind of very, dangerous to themselves, not in a very like in a violent way, but dangerous in the sense of like maintaining a romantic relationship. Yeah.
So I'm just kind of more curious. Would it be like it's an open relationship or no?
Yeah, it depends how you define it. So yes, that's the simplest answer. Like me defining it as polyamorous, like part of it's part of just the joke I said, because that's what people like I decided will glom onto for that joke. But like I think I'm still figuring out if it's really polyamorous or if it's more non-monogamous. Like that's still a conversation being had specifically. I think I do kind of want polyamory, but now at a certain point, like we were talking about how busy we get by like working, having relationships, friendships, and doing podcasts. Like we're both on a podcast and we know how much work it takes. So it's like at a certain point, like, yeah, I'm doing this lifestyle, but then I'm busy. And it's like, if I can't give someone that time, it doesn't matter if I'm non-monogamous or polyamorous. If I don't have time for someone and they need time, it's not going to happen anyway with someone else for a while. Cause it's like, I still have to find someone that's like, oh yeah, we'll be like ships in the harbor, like every once in a while, you know?
Yeah, totally. Well, we'll go ahead, Julie.
Well, no, because that was like, my questions were kind of geared to like your relationship. Because I know you all actually like make jokes and like talk about your relationship. But my question was going to be like, does like your partner feel some type of way when you talk about your relationship and like what you guys do?
Yeah. Like the joke, I think she found it very funny. She even shared it on her Instagram.
That's good.
But like, as far as like me dating as of right now, like, well, like I also don't want to fully speak for her, but it's like, as of right now, like she definitely dates other people and I haven't really been dating anyone right now. Anyone serious. I've gone on dates and like I've dated, but I don't have someone that's like, at the moment that's sticking around outside of her as like a partner or anyone I'm really seriously dating. So she's felt jealous and like, that's the most I'm comfortable. Like, I don't want to like say her part of the story, but it's like, yeah. And then there's moments where like, I think I feel jealous, like, but my jealousy if she's out and I'm like exhausted and resting, if she's out with somebody, like I just send her TikToks, you know. I was just like, oh, I'm still thinking about you. Like don't assume like I'm not thinking about you. I think that's kind of my energy, and she even appreciates that. Like, yeah.
And how is it like telling other people, I guess, about your partner? If you go on dates with like other people and letting them know that you like,
that's
you
interesting.
have a partner.
Yeah, like it's pretty candid. Like I I've made the mistake of trying to date somebody that was curious about this stuff, but wasn't fully in, and it felt like I hurt them. Like, I'll be candid, like that was one thing that I feel like I messed up on early on.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't continue doing that unless someone's like down with all that, or even specifically identifies with that, because if you don't date within that like community, you risk hurting people that were just kind of curious, or maybe just liked you and wanted to take a chance, right? And so like there's like apps for people like this, right? Of course, like anything. And so like when you date people in the community, it's just like very candid, and like some of the most vulnerable, authentic conversations I've ever had in dating. Partly could be because I'm getting older. Yeah. So it's less scary to just tell people who you are and where you are in life. But partly because it's like, this is alternative, and this requires a lot more communication than like typical hetero monogamy. Because hetero monogamy, in my experience, like getting to know who the person is takes like months. Like sometimes, like you're coached into like holding out your crazy back or what your issues are. And it's like, I'm not saying trauma dump on everybody, but it's also like, but if they want to feel this out, they have to know where you are and who you are. Yeah. And on these dates, like I tell them about my partner, I tell them about me, and they tell me about their experiences, and I tell them about my experiences. Like I went on this one date where we like really like talked about some heavy ass stuff, but it was like nice. And it wasn't like overwhelming. Yeah. And there were some incompatibilities, and that was fine, and we didn't continue. But it's like, before dating like this, I hadn't really had conversations like that deep before on like a date or two. Yeah.
That's interesting, because I feel like your point is like very interesting of like, yeah, when you're like in a, how you said it, a monogamous heterosexual relationship, it is very much like you're scared to kind of open up yourself and be vulnerable, because you're scared that the other person will be like, no, this is too much for me, or like like being so open sometimes is a little fearful, because it's kind of like you think that they'll judge you, right, for like who you are, or like the things you like, the things you don't like, right? But it's interesting hearing that how like there is already that vulnerability from like the get-go in a way, and it's kind of like, it's, I don't know, I'm just like very intrigued on like how that is.
I feel like I guess I kind of, not that I get it, but I feel like I can see the connection, because I guess it's like, since you guys are being so open of like, you know, this would be maybe an open relationship, that kind of already busts down a door of like, oh, like, okay, so like if I fuck up, it's okay, because, or if I say something weird, like it's okay, because like we're still gonna maybe see other people, so maybe those people like, you know, I don't know how to explain it.
Yeah, I think you're kind of hitting it of like, there's probably multiple reasons, but they're not betting everything on you. They're not putting everything on you to fix them necessarily, or to make them feel good only. You're like, hey, maybe I might be weird, but maybe it's like a kind of weird that you like for sometimes. Yeah.
That's what I'm kind of getting. That's the vibe that I'm kind of getting to, which is like, to me, it sounds so actually like very welcoming. It actually sounds really welcoming, because it's kind of, when heterosexual monogamous relationships, there is totally that fear of like, at least in the first dates, right, of like, oh, like I gotta watch what I say, because if I say something too much, or I open up too early, it's gonna scare the other person away. But I mean, I'm not to romanticize, I guess, polyamorous relationships, but
I also don't want you to romanticize it either, because it's like, I've learned a lot and I've enjoyed it, but it's also like, whatever issues you have, you're about to run into it over and over multiple times. Like, you still have to work on yourself. Like, for me, it's like, it started to feel similar to like doing comedy, of like, doing comedy, you have the same jokes and the same topics and the same things you go over and over, and you adjust them. And it's like, when you're dating, who are you? You can't be everything. You are a certain collection of topics and interests. So you're going to keep going in with people more vulnerable, more authentic, and they're going to like react a certain way, and they're going to be like, they might even tell you exactly how that felt to them. And eventually you're like, oh, I was not fully honest in that moment. Like, let me adjust that and correct that moving forward. It's like, you can do that in monogamy and heteros, just regular relationships, you know. trying to fight all that. But
yeah.
That's not to say this is always what it's going to be. It's just I've had experiences like this that were like wildly refreshing, but I've also had experiences where they're like running away from their partner and like they're not looking for intimacy. I'm partly doing this because I've struggled with intimacy. So it's like some people, no matter what you choose, you're either going towards a connection or running away from a connection. So it doesn't matter what your lifestyle is. You still have your battles to fight, you know?
Yeah, totally.
I'm learning a lot.
Thinking about it?
I'm like,
about to talk to your boyfriend?
You know?
You're like, you know what? We should try something new.
No. Wait, but so for y'all, like y'all already had this relationship, or it kind of just developed?
No, it developed. We became like, we started dating like right before the pandemic, and we had already like met through alternative means, you know, but we weren't official, but we ended up liking each other and connecting a lot and like opening up to each other a lot. And so we kind of both defaulted to monogamy still. And it's like, even though we were both kind of flirting with not being monogamous at first when we were first dating, and it eventually opened back up, but it was also like, had to be like a real long conversation and everything about those fears and like what's going to happen. What if we ruin this? What if I don't want this and you do later, and things like that. And so we almost were flirting with non-monogamy, and then we chose to just be monogamous because it's like we still had like religious backgrounds of like, this is how you operate in life, even if you're alternative. So it's kind of interesting.
That's like crazy, because that's something we talked about like 2 episodes ago, about how we all kind of come from religious backgrounds too, to certainty. We all went to private school, and what you brought up about how like subconsciously it still affects you, right? Like your religious upbringing, like in a lot of things like that. Do you feel like in other aspects of your life beyond like romanticism, do you feel like because you came? Wait, how religious was your family?
Very. We grew up Catholic, and like my family went to that church. My dad, before he passed away, his routine was to always help at the church. Like he was just some guy that would be like kind of a Eucharistic minister. Like he would help like pass the collection plate. He would help clean up and set chairs, all kinds of stuff, right? And like he was just some guy at the church, but like had a huge impact. Like people would come to him. It was kind of weird. Like he was so religious apparently for my siblings' birthdays, tell you how religious we were. He would like be like, "Oh, come to church and thank God you're still alive for your birthday. And then maybe we'll get you some McDonald's," you know, like there's still some McDonald's here and there, but it's like, come to church, thank God you're still here. Your birthday, you have to thank God for.
Wow.
Like it was pretty intense.
How did that affect you, like growing up? So right now, would you say you're at all even a little bit religious?
I'm not anti-religion. I think I'm still like allowing myself to like dip back. Right now, I'm like dipping back into maybe any spirituality, because this ties into a whole other conversation of like, I was Catholic, and at a certain point, like I was losing my religion, you know. I wasn't anti-God, but I was Catholic. I started reading about Buddhism and Islam at like 18.
Oh, wow.
And like I even did Ramadan, like fasting during Ramadan with some of my friends, and like one of my Muslim friends from high school. I went with his family 2 years in a row to break fast during Eid, and it was kind of cool. Like it's just like Mexicans. It just felt like other Mexicans, like Mexicans that took their religion more seriously, like because they're brown and also white and brown, and like they're very conservative, but also they're like
kind of
still
like,
want to mess, like be
party,
be a little wild, and like it. And then I remember being at their house and just watching The Office before we went to break fast, and it's like, so I was Catholic. I was wearing Buddhist prayer beads, and I was wearing the crescent moon and star. And I was just like, obviously conflicted, like looking for something. And so I I eventually got to Buddhism, and I was like, oh, I'm just trying to replace this system because I'm terrified. And I didn't like that motivation, so I just stopped all of it. I don't think it was a good answer for me, but like I didn't trust my reasoning for going into all these other religions and belief systems, so I just stopped.
That resonates so much with me. I feel like, or at least I feel like it resonates with a lot of like what I see in my generation, like people my age, in terms of like how a lot more people are getting into spirituality. Because I feel like some people that I knew growing up were very religious, and they're kind of like, they're very strongly believing in like, and this isn't me trying to disrespect their beliefs or anything, but like they believe strongly in like zodiac signs and like, you know, like numerology and stuff like that. And in a way, I feel like that's kind of still trying to find some sort of like stability in the spiritual realm of things. So I feel like that resonates a lot with me, because I know when I left, like, I guess my religion, or well, when we went to private school and we left, I know I was still kind of at first just trying to be like, like I don't care about that stuff. Like, I don't care. And then when I got older, it felt like I wanted something, like, I just, like you said, I needed structure. I needed something that like just kind of guided me. And for me, I replaced it with philosophy. Like,
Yeah.
in college, I just took like a bunch of philosophy classes, and that's kind of was my new, I guess, religion. And in a way, it changed my perspective on like most religions. And that's why me too, I'm not anti-religion either, because I see it as though like a lot of these religions are basically teaching kind of a way of living like philosophy does. But you were gonna say, Julie? Were you gonna say something? No. Oh, my bad. I thought you had your mouth open. Sorry about that. Were you? No? Why did I think I heard somebody say like a single word, but sorry about that.
He's hearing things.
Yeah, it's it's God.
The spirits talking to you.
You're speaking
They're
bad
like,
on religion.
I know.
they're like, believe in me.
Yeah. Do you ever have that fear? Because me and Brandon have talked about how like since we grew up in private school, it's not that we like consciously are like, oh no, we're sinning, like we're gonna go to hell. But do you ever feel like you're doing something and you're like, I feel like I shouldn't be doing this, like I shouldn't be talking about like using God's name in vain or anything? Just an example, right?
Yeah, not that example, but like I think subconsciously there's still this part of me like, oh, you're a bad person. Maybe that's just Catholicism, right? But it's like you're a bad person for choosing things you wanted instead of living in this structure. And that's part of why like it took me a long time. It took me like therapy to admit comedy. Maybe that's part of the reason. It took me like to my 30s to like admit I wanted an alternative relationship style. It's like some of that's probably just my personality too, but that stuff affected me. Like I was Catholic until I was like 19, and by choice at one point. So it's like I needed a system because I felt I had no structure. And then to be like, abandon a structure and still, there's this quote, I think it was a Jewish philosopher. I don't know if it was like, don't quote me on I don't know if it was Baruch Spinoza or someone, but they're like, give me a child until the age of 6 and he'll be a Jew for the rest of his life. And that is to say, whatever you raise a child in until the age of 6, that will be a huge impact and affect them for like all of their life. Like those formative years will define how you move through the world and how you interpret the world. And yes, you can change that, but that core is still there.
Wow. So it's to say that like basically relating it back to what we're talking about, right? It's like obviously for us, our upbringing, no matter how much we try, there's always going to be something subconsciously kind of there thinking about how like the Catholic God or like these like ideas of like heaven and hell, good and bad, are always kind of be there no matter how much we try
that
to like
feeling. It doesn't have to control you forever. You could become more conscious, I think. And I think that's what I've tried to do. You can get past it controlling you. I'm being repetitive, but it'll be there. And there'll be these twinges of like, I'm a bad person. I'm a sinner. I'm guilty. I don't deserve grace or love, you know? Like there's still that stuff in the background. So I'm like conscious of it, but that still echoes in my head, you know? Like there's still like bad mantras, you know?
Totally. I
It's
totally
just
see it.
embedded in us, bro.
I know. What do I do?
I don't know.
Do I just
Oh,
do a
yeah.
bunch of drugs?
I
Psychedelics?
I think, yeah. I mean, I definitely think you could change. Like, I think, I just think it kind of testifies to the fact that change is really hard.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because it's like, I don't know. It's not gonna happen overnight. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like when you put it like that, it's like that's like those years. That's what made you you. You know what I mean? To kind of uproot you is like probably takes so much work, so much self awareness, so much like an impossible amount of work. You know what I mean? So yeah, that's why I think it probably lingers. Is because like you probably don't have enough time in the day to even like you know to unlearn your childhood kind of in a way.
Well, because it's for us, it's like we grew up on that, right? A lot of our holidays are even kind of like on a lot of like being Catholic and like doing like, you know, baby Jesus and all these things and all these celebrations. And it's kind of like to a certain point, it's also like it's your culture, right? It's like that's how you grew up. That's what you remember as a kid. You remember like the stories that your parents would tell you as a kid about like stuff, and you were kind of like, it's still there and it's still just stuck there because it's those are your memories, you know.
Well, yeah, because I guess the way I see it is like, if you're religious, or maybe you go to the people in religious school are obviously religious. I mean, they dedicate their lives to that. You know, there's priests, there's nuns, there's people who obviously believe that really strongly. To me, religion is not like, for some people it is, but for a majority of religious people, it's a way of life. Yeah. Like, it's not like this little like, oh, it's this kind of thing I do. Again, there's but I'd say like if you consider yourself a religious person, that's an aspect of who you are. You know what I mean? Like with Catholic school, right? A lot of right from wrong comes from there. You know what I mean? And learning right from wrong, that's a big aspect of who you are. You know what I mean? Like you see it in media now. People can't wrap their minds around same-sex marriages. I know religious people hearing about a polyamorous, like, oh my God, you know, like he's gonna burn in hell. You know what I mean? Like that's an aspect of you, you know, like, and you can look at through the entire religion, you know, that it's I remember we had this teacher once who was like, Bible stands for basic instructions before leaving Earth. You know what I mean? So people model their lives around this. You know what I mean? Yeah. So when you deconstruct it and you're like, oh, there's a big core, like obviously, you know what I mean? Because and I'm not saying this to like I could, but I'm just saying to make the point that like it forms you, it forms a person. You know what I mean? It shapes who you are, how you interact with the world. You know, because there's philosophies. There's I remember all the like. A bunch of the proverbs, right? There was, if you have the faith the size of a mustard seed. There was, forgive someone 77 times 7 times. You know, all this shit. Yeah. There's I remember all this. You know what I mean?
He remembers it so well. He was remembering it so much better than I do. Right?
Well, I don't remember anything.
I remember it because I remember we do storyboard. I mean, it's Catholic school. You know what I mean? They obviously
it's all surrounded.
It's literally like
it's everywhere.
Science, math, religion class. You know what I mean?
Well, because it was like everything. I remember we would even have when you were talking about the storyboards. I remember we would have to like draw pictures of Jesus and draw pictures of the saints and draw pictures of like stories in the Bible. And it's like, to be a little kid, it's funny because I remember drawing like my pictures of SpongeBob and then like, all right, time to draw Jesus.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, like that type of stuff is like embedded in you.
No, 100%. I remember one time in class we had this project where we had to use geometry shapes to draw a picture. I think I drew like Iron Man. I think you drew like Deadpool or something like that. And then like you had to use like squares and shapes and all that shit. And then there was like on the side it was just Jesus. You know what I mean? It's kind of funny, that juxtaposition, you know?
It's funny because you even see it like kind of going on a tangent. You even see it in memes. Sometimes you see like it's a picture of like superheroes trying to pick up like the cross, and it's like the Hulk, Superman, Goku, and like these other characters trying to pick it up and they can't, and Jesus is like, pretty heavy, huh? It's like that's why also whenever I think religion is such like a hard topic to talk about sometimes, because it's like, for me, I talk about how like, oh, now I look at those books and I think of them philosophy. But for people who are religious, it's not philosophy. It's just reality.
It's how you were raised.
It's
like it's how you were raised. It's your interaction with the world. You know, I mean, people vote accordingly. Like it's not like I said, it's not this little like, oh, it's a fun little thing I do. It's for some people it's who they are, you know what I mean? It's like they make huge life decisions based on it, you know, like marriage, children. Some people don't get divorced because I don't get divorced in my religion. You know what I mean? I'm not saying this to make the point of what's right or wrong. Again, I could, but like, I'm just. I like how you always ask. I'm good.
I won't go there.
But I'm just exemplifying the fact that they're making big life decisions is based on it, like in the topics of abortion, you know, topics of you know, tons of things like that, you know. So I don't know. That's why it's trippy to think about, you know. But yeah.
It is tripping me out. I'm like, damn, it's a lot. Which is weird because I'm like, I feel like I never saw how embedded religion is with like everything until like recently, where it's like you always hear like people opposing stuff because of like a certain way that God says that it shouldn't be, right? So to me, it always mind blew me that it is like that because I always thought it kind of wasn't for some reason. Like, I don't know. I really thought it wasn't so much, but it is.
I get it. It's like
no, yeah, but even like I know I'm kind of being a little harsh, but even like good qualities, right? Because that's kind of what draws people to religion, or what they say draws them, right? I remember what was it? Feed the poor because they'll never be hungry in heaven, or something like that, or all that stuff. I mean, there's people I know who are like, oh, that's why I participate with the homeless and stuff like that. You know what I mean? It's interesting because it's like
there's definitely religion. There is definitely like it makes people do some good things. 100%. I mean, we talk about it how you've seen people like sometimes they're drug addicts. They're constantly like doing terrible things most of their life, and then they become born again Christians and turns their entire life around. You know, so there's a purpose on it. I just think there's like with anything else, some people kind of use it the wrong way. Yeah, some people are like. You know, they use it to spread hate, which is ironic because it's like in the Bible it says, I think, like love thy neighbor and like, what is it? The only person who should judge is God, right? No, in the Bible.
I remember, what is it? You shouldn't throw. Let who you was without sin cast the first stone. Stone, right? I think it was. I think the Lord.
They're like, can you define sin again?
No, yeah. But I guess the way I see it, right, is like how you said, was it like, give me a child till 6 and they'll be a Jew for the rest of their lives, right? The way I kind of see it is like when you're a little kid, right, your right and wrongs come from your parents, your siblings, the world react. But when you have the religion too, there's that too, which is why I think it's so like embedded. Yeah. Because like, I mean, I don't know. It's
just how you grew up.
Yeah, and I like what you said in a couple episodes about how it also gives you an internal conflict when you do kind of have an upbringing in religion, because like you said, who teaches you right and wrong is mainly mom and dad, but then you add in the God aspect, and it's like no, don't listen to mom and dad, listen to God. God is the one who has the answers. So it's like, who's right? Should I listen to mom and dad, who are like I can physically feel or hear and telling me what to do? Or this guy who everybody's telling me is real.
The guy who's gonna burn me for eternity if I don't. You know?
Yeah. It's pretty tricky, man. Yeah. But all power to you. You know, if whatever you're following, because I mean, to be religious until you're 19, I think is even crazier. Because I didn't feel like I was religious until I didn't feel like I stopped being religious until I was like 12.
Really, I tried to be religious at 18, 19. 17, 18, 19. I was losing my religion a lot younger, around your age. I remember going to First Communion and being like, I don't know. Like
drinking blood of a body seems kind of a little off. I don't know if this is kind of the right way to go. Yeah.
I guess for me, it was always like, I know that, like I said, I feel like we got a little lucky with the Catholic school we went to. I feel like generally speaking, they weren't too crazy. Like they weren't. Like
because we're in LA.
Yeah, you know what I mean. Like I remember when I did my confirmation, it wasn't at that church, and oh my god, they were like in the comic books, like you know, like they were like in the comic books. They're actual like how people tend to think of Christians. You know what I mean? Very. I remember the guy said, I don't know how it came up, but somebody brought up a gay marriage, and the guy said, it's not that God has a problem with gay people. He has a problem with sex that doesn't lead to procreation, and by definition, gay people cannot have sex that leads to procreation. So he doesn't hate gay people. He hates that gay people have sex.
He hates gay sex.
Yeah.
Bruh.
You know?
That's kind of funny.
Yeah, it is a little funny.
God doesn't hate gay people. He just hates gay sex.
He just that's not what he looks up, you know?
Yeah. That's not his favorite category.
Yeah.
You know? No, yeah, but like just stuff like that, or I just find it kind of weird because like I don't know, like for me, I was always like, I don't agree with so much of the stuff that they say, and to me, me personally, I don't.
You're not trying to push your beliefs onto anybody.
I'm like, I don't agree with so much of what they say. You know what I mean? And I feel like they say it so much, and it seems to like cross borders. You know what I mean? Like it's at this church, it's this church, it's on TV. This guy says this, guy says that. And I'm like, at a certain point, I feel like. And I just can't call myself Catholic then, because it's like I just don't agree with half the stuff you're saying. You know what I mean? It feels weird to kind of like cherry pick, like because I feel like I don't think that's wrong to do that, but I guess for me personally, if I'm doing that, then I'm not following that faith then, because I'm not following that rules. It's like if I was playing basketball, right, and I was like, yeah, but I don't like the foul rule, and I don't like that you can't like. Go out of bounds and shit. At a certain point, I'm not even playing basketball anymore. You know what I mean? I'm kind of doing my own thing. That's why I'm kind of like, that's why I don't really tend to lean towards religion. But that's just my little spiel. But yeah,
that's what helped push me out.
Yeah,
is more of that happening, because I remember in my church, because when I was trying to stay in and be religious, like I would lecture at my youth mass, and like so I would read at church, like. Almost every other Sunday or whatever. Yeah. Like I was even so good at it, they started driving me to Rancho Cucamonga to read at another church because I was so good at it, you know? Yeah. And but it was still hard for me because I was like, I'm reading this stuff out loud and I don't agree with some of this stuff. Yeah. And there's this like conflict of like, wow, I'm a liar. Like I'm a bad person because I don't agree with this, but I'm like, like proselytizing effectively to a church. And there was this one guest priest that came into my church, and he was like, because this was in like 2007, 2008, I think, 2006, around there. And he's like younger, and he had came to visit our church, and he was a guest priest, and he's like, let me feature real quick. And he said, bad joke, didn't land. But he's like, everybody's upset. People are coming to church less. Our numbers are dwindling. But you guys also don't want to include gay people in your church. And if you want people to start coming back, you need to be more accepting. And it was like controversial at my church. Like people were mad. And I was like, I wasn't saying it out loud. I was like, yeah, that's why I want to leave, because you guys are all mad that like you're supposed to love people and you're using this as like, I get it. Maybe you believe all that stuff. I don't. And I have to sit around you guys and hear you guys. I'm lecturing and you guys are still like, no, push everyone away, but we're still going to complain that people don't come to church anymore.
Wow. No, definitely. I mean, like, I guess that was also another thing that I always had an issue with is I went to school. I read the book. Like I read it. Like I know my shit. Like I might get some shit wrong, but I remember the commandments, the sacraments, the 7 deadly sins, the beatitudes, all that shit. Right? And the main through line, right? At least of Jesus, which is their main character, right? It was like love everybody, right? Be forgiving, do all this shit. And everywhere I go, it's the exact opposite. You know what I mean? They say that until love everybody except these guys. Yeah. Be forgiving except to these guys. Give to the poor, but not really. You know what I mean? And again, at a certain point, it's like I just genuinely feel surrounded by hypocrisy. Like it feels like a lot of people hide behind religion to keep pushing their hateful beliefs or pushing their ignorance. It seems like the coward's way to be ignorant. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like I'm just really like deep down, I'm not accepting. I low-key don't like gay people. But I'm gonna hide behind because God told me to say that. Yeah. You know what I mean? I hate that. I feel like I really dislike that. Yeah. I feel like I'd almost prefer it if you would just say that you just believe that. You know what I mean? Instead of constantly saying, well, you know, come on, Don't attack my religion now. You know what I mean? And it's like, bro, I read the book. They don't say it once in the book. I remember when we would do children's liturgy, right? Doing the first reading, the Psalms, all that shit. There was never a bar that was like, oh, by the way, fuck gay people. You know what I mean? That's not in there, you know? So that's, for me, is why I was always so soured on it. Because I was like, this is just, I don't know. It's hard for me to articulate how much I feel like it just.
No, I get what you mean, yeah. But I guess the people who are religious would use the argument of like, well, that's what people do with the religion, but that's not what the religion is, right? That's the argument that I guess somebody would make of like, oh yeah, like there is a lot of people who do badly and like oppress people using our God's word, but God doesn't want us to do that. I guess that's the argument that people would
definitely
make.
But I guess for me, like kind of going back to it a little bit, it's like the people who believe the religion do that. The people in charge do that. There was this big, I remember I mentioned it before. I looked up the guy's name. I don't want to get into it, but there's a guy, he covered up a bunch of priests who would molest little kids. You know what I mean? And they confessed it. That's all cool. Like, we don't need to know about that. Yeah. The Pope, it was big news that the Pope was like, maybe we should apologize to gay people. You know what I mean? But it's still kind of a sin. You know what I mean? It's like at a certain point, it seems like at every level, the people in charge, the believers, are saying this is what it is. You know what I mean? And to kind of dance around it and say, oh, but it's not really, because I don't do that. You know what I mean? It seems like such a cop-out. Like going back to that basketball analogy. It's like if we're like, oh, the sport isn't this, but like all the players do it, all the refs call that, the league kind of generally accepts that, the fans love it, you know what I mean? It's kind of like, well, then it kind of seems like it's part of the sport at this point, you know what I mean? Like
For sure.
That's a good analogy. Yeah, that's a good analogy.
But yeah, I don't know. It's just my little spiel, I guess.
No, that's pretty real. But I know you had a question, right? Or you had a
I guess to kind of start wrapping things up, I'll finish with a bomb. Maybe you can help me articulate this, because I don't know. I feel like there's a bit of awkwardness, and I don't want to not just offend them, but I just want to be responsible with the question that I'm asking, because I don't want to mislead anybody or anything like that. I was just curious, because I consider you a professional. You're a comedian. You know what I mean? If anybody knows comedy, it's probably you. You know what I mean? I feel as though you mentioned it with like George Lopez, right? And the show, right, where they kind of sometimes reinforce like stereotypes. Like the butt of the joke was that George is ugly, and it made you feel ugly, and you were like, I don't think he's ugly. You know what I mean? And we get in comments in reels and stuff like that when we bring up kind of issues, and they'll be like, Mexicans aren't soft. Mexicans will joke about this. Like, we do that stuff. Like the Edgars. I remember on TikTok, right? There was like this thing about Mexicans saying slurs. I'm not going to repeat them, but they're like, oh, it's because we own them, because we like, you know what I mean? It's funny. We find it funny. I kind of wanted to get what your opinion on that was. You know what I mean? Because coming from a comedian, how do you feel about that? You know? Yeah,
because I think it's still something like that kind of is a conversation in my head. There's still part of me that wants to be a little wild on stage and be a little reckless. But it's also like there's always a context to things, and trust, I think, is always a huge thing. Like, I wouldn't joke with you guys like I joke with my friends, because we're not really friends yet. Like, I really like you guys, but I'm not going to be saying wild shit to you guys because it's like, we're cool and I like you guys, but like, I haven't built trust with you to be like, say crazy shit like that, you know? And I think there's a time and place, like at least amongst friends, right? There's another conversation there, but the same thing in like how we joke. It's like, you don't get to, even someone that said wild stuff, like, you don't get to tell people how they get to joke or how they get to take things. Like, I still kind of want to take risks, but the way I want to take my risks is like, I want to take ownership of it. If I'm going to take a risk, I'm willing to eat all the criticisms and negativity that comes with it. And it's like, Mexicans are this way, or no, I don't get to really, even if I want to, speak for other people and how they need to take things and how they need to be, because it's like, people don't deserve that, that's also crazy. Like, in a way, it's crazy to tell people who they need to be and how they need to take things and how they need to operate. It's like, they got religion for that. We just talked about this. And it's like, you want to find that funny, you want to joke about that, cool. But if you come to me at work and we're not cool and you say that to me, it's like, you're an asshole.
Yeah.
Like, I have a friend, we say wild shit to each other, but guess what? Me and him have been friends since middle school, and we trust each other. It's like, I don't go around to just anybody, or I don't go on the internet and be like, you're ugly because you're indigenous, or you're fat and all this stuff, because it's like, why would I? Where is this coming from? Like, people, like, you ever see fat dudes making fun of each other because they're fat? It's like, you're trying to feel better, and you're kind of trying to own it, but you're also just trying to shove someone else down so you feel above somebody. And it's like, I'm not going to police anybody. I'm not going to play morality police. But, like, how about you actually look at why you want to do these things to complete strangers? I don't know. Did I answer that? Like,
I guess the point I'm trying to get at is, like, do you? Because I guess the reason I'm kind of dancing around a little bit is I don't want to suggest that Mexicans or Latino people are the perpetrators of the racism that is given to them.
Oh yeah,
that's not what I'm trying to say.
Oh, I see.
I just was curious as to see what your opinion was. Is, do you think that kind of, like, joking about that stuff and kind of taking pride out of that, do you think that's like, that's really kind of taking it back, or do you think that's really a power move, or do you think that kind of just, I don't know, makes racism more casual, or makes things more casual?
Yeah,
I get kind of what I'm saying.
Now I understand more. I don't know is the simple answer, because it's like, I don't joke about that with people. I think I would have in the past, but, like, now that I realize, like, I'll talk about this. I used to be much more open to joking about race and color and stuff like that. And I do with, like, a friend, because there's trust, right? But, like, I used to have a group of friends that were, like, a lot of Latinos, different shades, and we used to joke about this stuff, and we're like, oh, it's all just a joke. It's all just a joke. And then that would start including other groups of people. And then eventually, like, oh, this person is racist. Like, they've been hiding in plain sight because we just agreed this is all a joke, and some of us meant it that way. And some people are hiding in plain sight because they are actually very racist. And then you feel like some guilt, and you feel culpable because you're like, oh, like, I helped this, like, go along. And it's like, that sucks. Like, it sucks to have felt like you helped it keep going. And I'm not saying, like, never joke about that, never talk about it, but it's like, you still got to own, like, if you messed up, if you try to own it. Because it's like, you can contribute, but you could also, like, build a friendship that way. But you don't get to push that on somebody. I don't know.
No, definitely. I mean, I guess kind of just a slight continuing on. I kind of want to ask you, because I like comedy. I like Norm Macdonald. I like Bill Burr. But I saw this Mark Maron joke the other day. I'm sure you know who that is, right? Yeah. And I think it kind of sums up what's, in my opinion, kind of been going on in comedy. I don't know if your perspective is a little bit different, because I'm an outsider and you're an insider. Is it seems like there's this huge, like, anti-woke, like, comedians of, like, I can't believe people are so offended at my jokes. Like, people shouldn't be offended, or, like, I should be able to joke about whatever I want, or, like, just kind of the same shtick of, like, I should, you know what I mean? How do you feel about that? Like,
Yeah, I think there's some of it where people are just being a contrarian, because it's like, don't tell me what to do. And it's like, all right, like, I guess that's, like, that can be comedy. That's been comedy at times. But it's like, I hate that, like, it is framed as woke, because it's like, some of this stuff exists because it was, by whatever definition they're trying to say woke is, was woke, was to fight and push against oppressive systems. And Mark Maron specifically has talked about that on his podcast. And it's like, yeah, you can make your anti-woke stuff. And, like, I don't even think it's all bad, because sometimes you can still have unique, nuanced takes, but like some of it is lazy and like buying into that culture war of like, yeah, I'm not going to be told what to do. And it's like, yeah, maybe you're kind of saying free speech matters, but it's like, you're also just like, what you say is integrity is not really integrity, because some of this comedy, vaudeville, and all this stuff, like, it started racist and eventually allowed people from minority groups to push back and push out and have their voices heard. And it's like, you're kind of missing a lot of context and history when you're saying that, in my opinion.
No, yeah, definitely. I guess because, like, I don't know. I see the same, the Roseanne joke where she's like, my pronouns are kiss my ass. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or
beyond lazy.
Yeah, jokes like that I mean, I like some of Ricky Gervais's stuff. I like what he did at the Golden Globes, kind of tearing down actors and stuff. But I kind of disagree with him a little bit when he kind of talks about, like, oh, I should be able to offend you and stuff like that. Because I don't know. I feel like they missed the point. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, I don't actually fully disagree with them. I think their take is lazy and not nuanced. And it's like, yeah, maybe that's what you want your comedy to do, like draw more attention. But beyond that, it's like, you're not doing when you get higher up, like, you have this energy of like, well, I'm already up here, like, I'm just going to make these jokes. And like, there's comes from a truth and a place of like not wanting, there's still that's why sometimes I feel conflicted, because they're like free speech. And it's like, yeah, if you take away free speech, it comes at all the minorities too, right? And it's going to silence them too. But it's also, you still got to own up the fact that you didn't care enough to look at why people are bothered by your take and how there's like no research done about what you're saying.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, like, I really like the Mark Maron joke. His joke was, he was like impersonating comics. Like, why can't I just say whatever I want? He was like, you mean you don't like that there's consequences to your actions? You know? I don't know. But yeah, that's just more my questions. Just wanted to see what your take was. Yeah. But yeah.
I'm more interested in this, like, there seems to be this very bad, like, attitude towards, like, this idea of wokeness. And I'm more interested in, like, where it comes from. And I don't know if you have the answer to that, but, like, as a comic, I know that's something that, as Brandon brought up, is kind of always being combated.
Yeah.
What's kind of like, why do people think wokeness is necessarily a negative thing?
Man, you could start a whole other episode on this. But where I think I stand now, and that's after like listening to a lot of people on TikTok and like even reading some things, it's like wokeness is like, first of all, that was what Black people were saying about their awareness of what they've gone through and their struggles. I think specifically in Black America and in America. And it's like, and then you start to twist and be like, oh, this is anti like freedom or anti veiled white, right? Mm-hmm. And it's like, that's what some of these conservative politicians starting to say of like, I'm anti woke. And it's like, they're kind of, to me, it starts to be a dog whistle. It starts to basically be like, they view wokeness as like an attack on white supremacy, and they don't want to say that. Some of these people. I don't want to be someone that plays morality police, but I'm also not someone that's going to avoid this conversation and not going to learn about this conversation. And I've been trying to learn about it. And it's like, these things are like, some of these people are completely unaware that they're fighting in the white supremacy battle. And some people are. And it's like, who's the vampire in the room? I don't know. Some of them are familiars and some of them are vampires. And some of them don't know they're familiars. And it's like, this is a white supremacy thing versus like minority communities, specifically Black people sometimes. And that's kind of what I think it is. Just because people of those communities participate in it doesn't mean that this is an anti-minority or anti-Black.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I kept thinking about it, how, like, because I know Childish Gambino in what's it called? What's the song? His famous song? One of his biggest songs.
Oh, the This Is America song?
No. The one right before that. Stay Woke, where he says stay woke.
Oh, Redbone?
Yeah, Redbone. Yeah. He just mentions it in there, to stay woke. And like, I know it's that motion of like, as a minority, be aware of like all these things that are kind of systematically implemented to keep you oppressed. And so what I guess to me has always been mind blowing is when I see the older generation of like our heritage being like, I hate these young woke people. Because first of all, I never knew what woke was until the older generation told me I was woke.
Yeah.
And I was like, to me, I just felt I was educated, and I felt like I needed to let other people know about certain things that I became educated in.
Yeah.
And
just to kind of, sorry to cut
no,
you
go
off.
ahead, go ahead.
I really like what you said. And I really like what you said about how it's like this veiled, like, being afraid of losing white supremacy. Because I really dislike, I mean, I don't dislike it in the sense, I just dislike the way the connotation it's been given.
Yes.
Of like, oh, anti-wokeness. Because it seems like you're just saying like anti, like, stupid or some shit like that. You know what I mean? But like, if you like deconstruct what wokeness is, right? Like, it's just tolerance and education. So these people are upset about people who are tolerant and people who are educated on the history of their cultures, the history of oppression, the history of white supremacy. You know what I mean? So when people are like, oh, I'm anti-woke, it's like, you're really anti those things, but you're too much of a coward to say that I'm anti those things.
Yeah,
you know?
because, and it's also interesting because they'll say they're against these things, and then when they start to be more honest about it, they're like, I'm against like Black Lives Matter, I'm against like this and that, and it's like, sure, there's flawed people in these systems, even in the communities we want to support, but you point at some people being flawed and corrupted in our communities and write it all off immediately. And it's like Black Lives Matter was proven to be corrupt more recently, but a lot of the other members are gone probably because they were all killed, right?
Yeah.
And then the one that, I don't know if they were put into place, was corrupt. And it's like, what a metaphor for American colonialism history in Latin America, in the Caribbean, in Africa, of like, you kill off the real opposition and install puppets. I don't know that that's what's happening in Black Lives Matter. I haven't done that. I should not have talked about it if I did my research.
No, funny enough, I showed them a video all about what you were just talking about. Yeah.
And it's like, this is the MO of our country. This is the MO of our. It feels dangerous to talk about this stuff out loud, but it's like, this is the MO. You take out these groups, like the Black Panthers, you take them out, you corrupt them and write them off. And it's like, look at them, always corrupt. And it's like, all right.
No, yeah, I mean, like, you can kind of see it with like the war on, I think it's socialism, right? Where they'll be like, oh, socialism never works. Look at this country. And then you look and you find out that the United States orchestrated a coup, and the original leaders were all assassinated. And now it's new leaders that they obviously approved of. And that's why socialism doesn't work in that country, because it's not really that. You know what I mean? So, yeah, totally. I get what you mean when it's like, it's very interesting.
Yeah, and a result of that is that, like, then people in our communities, like people who are in the minority community, then they see it as like, oh yeah, then that's bad. And they get kind of like tricked into kind of also being part of that agenda of like, yeah, like wokeness is bad. Like, when in reality, like, wokeness is something that's in history kind of helped us, you know, develop and gain a lot of like rights and put a lot of movements, you know, a lot of what like MLK or like a lot of big like leaders who fought for civil rights would be deemed as woke. Yeah, you know, and I think that's crazy.
And they did do that, and they did villainize it. Like, there's even like newspaper clippings about MLK. It'll be like peaceful protests. It's the same argument they've been using to like dismiss movements because it was flawed at times, or because the FBI made it violent every single time. And it's like, this is a tale as old as time. For anyone that's looked into it, or like, you just start to see this is always going to happen. Even when people are right, they get invalidated.
Yeah. I mean, you saw it when like the protests were happening and then riots started to happen, right? Where people were like, oh, like, it's people trying to get violent to show that they're not doing it peacefully. They're actually just rioting. Remember? Because like, even on the news, they wouldn't call them protests. They would call them riots. So it's like they try to twist like everything of like what they're fighting for, right?
Yep.
But that's mainly the reason why because like I said, I only recently found out about this wokeness thing until recently, and I was like, I never really liked the kind of a stigma that it's been given, because I really don't understand how people can be against being, like you said, educated and aware of like the history of like mistreatment in the United States.
And I think it kind of goes back to just like, I think people are so used to, or like there's just like a thing that they've been so used to that they're not ready for the change, right? They're not ready to like get out of that, like how we say like we tolerate insults, right? And people don't want to get out of that for some reason, where it's kind of like, no, we shouldn't be tolerating like being insulted and being called names. Like that isn't right. Like we should start having a change of like, and standing up for ourselves and like being like, this isn't how we should be getting treated. Like this isn't how we should be. And I think it goes back to like, people are just so used to it. They're just like, no, like it's fine. Like we can tolerate it.
Well,
like,
people are taught it's like the right way to think about things. It's the status quo, you know, you should stay the way, that's the way things are, you know, like change is bad. That's what like, you know, like kind of what Ricky and Brandon were getting to, you know, you're kind of taught that that's like something that you shouldn't support.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely. I mean, like, but like, I guess just to kind of echo it, I hate the like, the connotation it's given, you know what I mean? Like,
I feel that too.
I don't get how the opposition gets to be like, you know, the Chad in the meme, you know, to be like, oh, look at how goofy these guys are, you know what I mean? Like, because it's so hypocritical, you know what I mean? They'll be like, small government, but let us track your periods, and you can't get married to unless we approve, or like freedom of speech, but no more pronouns.
Yeah.
You know, or ban Latinx. You know, don't say that. Freedom of speech, but like these books, don't read them. You know what I mean? Or you know, it's like, what are you even talking? I feel like it's just so annoying because it goes over people's heads that it's just the government or like propaganda and white supremacist puppeting. You know what I mean? But what do I know?
Yeah, but like you said, this could be a whole other episode. So I'm gonna go ahead and just kind of, you know, bring us home. This is an amazing episode, amazing conversations. Ricky Mac, thanks for coming on the show. Shout out to Un Poquito podcast, which is Ricky is a regular, and he's a member of, I shouldn't even say regular, he's a member of amazing podcast. You guys should totally check it out. They're fucking hilarious. Like, they got some good jokes. You saw Ricky.
He's hilarious.
Yeah, Ricky's really funny.
Check out his stand up. They do shows all the time. You guys should check that out. If you guys like our podcast, I'm sure you'll love their podcast.
Yeah, you guys came to our show, our first one.
Yeah. We do. So like, if you're like, oh, what, you know, and you want some familiar faces, we have an episode with them. You know, I think we did a vlog with you guys too. So
that's right.
Yeah,
so definitely.
Their stand up is funny. Me and my sister went. They had free beer, which is like insane. Like it was really good. It was really funny, and check them out. Maybe you'll see us there.
Yeah. Ricky, where can they find you?
You can find me at the Ricky Mac on Instagram. I'm bad at my TikTok. It should be that. The Ricky Mac 89 maybe on TikTok.
I'll try to put all the links in the bio. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, just go ahead and check that out. But
thank you so much for coming, Ricky. It was a great conversation. I hope you come on again.
Thank you.
And I hope we get to work even more in the future. But thank you guys for watching. We'll see you guys next week.
Bye.
See you.